The day Robert's first love returned to the country, I left, carrying his child. 3 years later, we met again at a business banquet. The boss next to me was urging me to drink, but I politely declined. It's getting late. I have to go pick up my child. Just as the words left my mouth, Robert's deadpan voice came from behind me. Child. A large hand clamped around my waist, and warm breath brushed against the back of my neck. You can have a child too? Chapter 1. Men, of course, cannot have children, but I can. Robert's hand was still resting on my waist. My expression instantly froze. Before I could even open my mouth, the weight at my waist suddenly vanished. Robert stepped in front of me, wearing a fake smile as he raised his glass. Just a joke. Mr. Oliver, don't mind me. I averted my gaze in a panic, tugged at my collar, and made up a random excuse to leave in a hurry. It wasn't until I walked out of the venue that the burning stare on my back finally disappeared. I leaned against the restroom wall, gasping for air. No one could have expected that former lovers would reunite in such an awkward way. Soon, the rhythmic clicking of leather shoes against the tiles echoed outside the door. I held my breath and looked down through the gap under the stall door. A pair of impeccably polished leather shoes stopped right outside. I covered my mouth, not daring to make a single sound. An eerie silence fell outside the door. I blinked. The leather shoes tapped the ground lightly twice, like a warning. Robert's calm voice rang out. Come out. Those 2 short words made me break out in a cold sweat. The fear carved into my bones made me involuntarily open the stall door. Robert stood outside, dressed in a black suit. His tall figure almost completely blocked the overhead light. He looked down at me, his lowered eyelashes concealing the thick, swirling desire in his eyes. I looked up at him, my lips trembling slightly, perhaps still clinging to a sliver of false hope. I asked, Is something the matter? Robert had his hands in his pockets, his broad, straight shoulders blocking all my escape routes. He looked at me without speaking. He simply took a hand out of his pocket and reached toward me. Long time no see. Do you have anything you want to say? Of course I did, but clearly saying it would be useless. He had already recognized me. Sitting in Robert's car, the flush on my face still hadn't faded. The corners of my eyes stung slightly from tears. I opened my mouth, trying to negotiate. I have things to do later. Can you let me leave first? The driver in the front seat tactfully lowered the privacy partition. Robert still maintained that calm facade. Only I could tell from the slight twitch in his jawline that he was absolutely furious at this moment. Hearing my words, he turned his head, his voice level. We'll go home first, then we'll talk. I swallowed nervously. Even though we hadn't seen each other for 3 years, I was still terrified of Robert's explosive temper. He was the only son of the Davis family, wielding overwhelming power and influence. He could do whatever he wanted. As a result, he had developed a vindictive personality that repaid every slight. During the years I was with him, I had seen the fates of too many people who offended Robert. The luckiest ones ended up crippled. The worst cases, I didn't even dare to imagine. And the mistake I had made now was enough to get me killed 800 times over. Given the current situation, if I entered the doors of the Davis estate, I feared I would never come out again. Gritting my teeth, I leaned closer to Robert, lowered my head, and put myself in an extremely submissive posture. Mr. Robert, I can promise you anything, but I really have something very important to do right now. Please, let me go. I don't know which word struck Robert's nerve. I only felt a sharp pain in my chin as he suddenly flipped my body over. The webbing of his hand clamped down on my jaw, his thumb pressing down forcefully on my lips. Only one word remained in my mind. Pain. I squinted my eyes. My vision was filled entirely with the raging fire churning in Robert's dark eyes. Even the breath he exhaled was scorching hot. I looked at his face. My body was wedged into the narrow car seat, and Robert's leg pressed against my waist, locking me firmly in place. At that moment, I even forgot how to breathe. The soreness in my body traveled to my brain, scrambling all my thoughts. I lost even the ability to react. Too close. Robert was too close to me. It felt as long as I lifted my head just a fraction, I would brush against his lips, just like 3 years ago. Important things? What important things could you possibly have? Am your most important thing right now, he said through gritted teeth. Chapter 2. I don't remember how I finally managed to open the car door. I practically stumbled and crawled my way out of the car. Awkwardly, I tugged at my suit jacket. Once I steadied myself, I bowed toward the open door. Thank you, Mr. Robert. Robert's voice softened slightly as he used his long leg to hook the door shut. He left behind one faint parting sentence. "I'll be waiting for you at home in 10 hours. The car sped away. I watched the exhaust fumes trail behind it. Gritting my teeth, I swallowed hard. I could still taste blood in my mouth, and my tonsils felt bruised. Swallowing felt like swallowing knives. Still looking so utterly unsatisfied, I complained internally. I turned and caught a cab to the nearest kindergarten. I really do have a child. She is just 2.5 years old, in the junior class of kindergarten. Picking up my sweet-smelling, soft daughter at the school gates, I instantly felt all my exhaustion vanish. Bubble buried herself in my arms, softly chattering about her day. I rubbed her soft hair. My heart melted completely into a puddle. Children are the best medicine for the soul. I didn't believe it before, but after having Bubble, I did. Back then, I awkwardly took the money, fled the country, and gave birth to her. Because I was terrified of Robert's retaliation, I delayed returning until very recently. Bubble is young, but she's very sensible. She never cried or made a fuss while living a hard life with me. After dropping Bubble off at a friend's house, I immediately took a cab to Robert's place. Almost the second I knocked, the door opened. I froze. Robert stood at the door wearing nothing but a bath towel. He had obviously just finished showering. Water droplets trailed down his defined muscles, soaking into the fabric. He looked at me, raising an eyebrow slightly. "You're here early?" Before me was a massive expanse of bare skin. My eyes didn't even know where to look, so I just kept my head down and nodded haphazardly. A soft chuckle came from above me. "Are you blushing?" Just as I opened my mouth to say something, a hand grabbed my clothes. Before I could react, my vision spun. The door slammed shut with a bang. I was lifted by my backside and placed onto the entryway cabinet. Robert's hair was still dripping, the icy, slippery water falling into the hollow of my collarbone. His hand landed on my waist. His index finger popped open a button and slipped in through the gap. The button didn't just unfasten. The sound of tearing fabric echoed in the hall. I clutched my collar, my eyes widening. "What are you doing?" Robert didn't speak. He kept his head down and suddenly pressed his hand against my lower abdomen. His hand was freezing. I shivered. It felt like fireworks were going off in my brain, crackling and popping. I reached out, futilely gripping a small piece of my collar. Robert's breathing was heavy, puffing against my ear over and over, even exhaling while holding my earlobe in his lips. Seeing as my brain was about to turn to mush, I gritted my teeth and spat out one last sentence. "If we're going to do this, hurry up." Robert looked up at me, seemingly surprised by my audacity. His rough thumb forcefully rubbed over the scar on my abdomen, bringing out a full-body wave of goosebumps. His voice was hoarse. "What is this scar?" I looked down at the crown of his hair, my throat feeling tight. Driven by a sense of vindictiveness, I reached out, grabbed his hair, and pulled him back a fraction. My lips brushed against his wet hair. I spat out the words, one by one, "A C-section scar." Robert stopped talking. He just kept his head down, thinking about who knows what. After a long time, he slowly raised his head. His dark, bright eyes looked like glass beads soaked in water. That red mole on his eyelid was startlingly vibrant. He raised an eyebrow and asked, word by word, "If I work a little harder, will you give me another child?" I was in a daze for a moment. Once I snapped out of it, I hurriedly looked away. I was unconscious for a day and a night. When I opened my eyes again, I saw a snow-white ceiling. The smell of disinfectant slowly drifted into my nose. I blinked slowly, turned my head, and opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat hurt terribly. Suddenly, I remembered something incredibly important. Bubble. I struggled to sit up, but as soon as I propped myself up, someone pushed me back down. Robert was sitting leisurely to the side, wearing casual clothes, a pair of half-rimmed glasses resting on his tall nose bridge. I opened my mouth, anxiously pointing at it, wanting to speak but unable to make a sound. I shook off his hand and tried to get up again. Robert frowned and stood up. His tall frame blocked the light, pressing down on me like a mountain. My movements gradually slowed. I glared at him and struggled to squeeze out a few words. "I want to go home." Robert stared at me, blinked, and said slowly, "Your body is too weak. Lie down for now." I glared at him, watching the clock on the wall tick away, growing more and more frantic. I angrily shook off his hand and reached to pull the 4 needle out of my left arm. Robert pinned my hand down, sighed, and pressed a finger to his lips. "Be quiet." Quiet? How could I be quiet? I still didn't know where my daughter was. Who knew that in the next second, Robert would point to the adjacent bed, separated by a curtain. The The sound of even breathing came from the other side. Robert walked around and pulled back the curtain. I saw Bubbles' little face buried in the blanket, her exposed cheeks flushed, sleeping soundly. My movements instantly lost all their strength, and I collapsed softly back onto the bed. Only then did the physical pain hit me in a delayed wave. Robert dropped the curtain, turned to look at me, and raised an eyebrow with a half-smile. "Bubble." I stared into his eyes, the expression on my face slowly fading. I don't know how much time passed, but it wasn't until my eyes grew sore that I closed them and silently turned my head to the side. Ever since I was little, my mom told me I was different from others. I couldn't use public restrooms, I couldn't let anyone see my body, and I couldn't show that I was different. I had to treat myself as a normal person. I tried hard to live as a normal guy, but in the 3rd month of my escape abroad, I fainted in my rental apartment and was rushed to the hospital. The doctor told me I wasn't an isolated case. There were many people in the world like me. I was pregnant in the body of a man. If it hadn't been for the massive amount of money I took from Robert back then, I probably would have died on the operating table. I don't have a father. My mom was a streetwalker and she had me with some client. She didn't like me because after giving birth to me, her figure deteriorated, and her business suffered along with it. The scene I saw most growing up was the shaking, creaking, cheap metal bed. The heavy breathing of men and the seductive cries of a woman made up the only sounds of my childhood. I stopped going to school after the college entrance exams. My mom got sick very seriously. I had no choice but to work outside to earn money for her treatments. But in just 2 short years, her condition worsened. It was also during the most difficult time while I was working at a bar that I met Robert. He came to hang out with friends and spotted me at first glance. He said he wanted to keep me. I had heard of his reputation. The whole circle knew him, he played hard and played ruthless. Robert wasn't the only one who wanted to buy me, but thinking of my mother clinging to life in her hospital bed, I chose Robert, who offered the most money. After being with Robert for 3 years, I realized he was completely different from the rumors. Aside from having a high sex drive, he was great in every other aspect. He treated me well, was generous with money, and didn't mess around. If I hadn't heard from the people around him that Robert had a first love hidden in his heart for 7 or 8 years, I almost would have fallen in love with him. Robert's first love was abroad, so he had to settle for me, someone who looked somewhat like his untouchable white moonlight. I was just a tool to vent his desires. I had never received love. My mom seemed to love me, yet also seemed not to. Robert treated me well, and I almost fell for it. But I knew clearly in my heart, Robert didn't like me. I was just a substitute. Couldn't like him. My feelings would only be a burden to him. Time always passes. My mom's condition grew more and more severe. She was often delirious and couldn't recognize me. Her bone-thin hands would grab strangers, telling them to take her home to get money, saying her son needed to study and needed a lot of money. When my mom died, it happened to coincide with the return of Robert's first love. I lay by my mother's hospital bed, crying until no tears were left. Meanwhile, Robert, with pomade in his hair, was in high spirits heading to the airport to pick up his true love. The main character had returned, so it was time for me, the substitute, to leave. Chapter 3. As soon as Bubble woke up, she started looking for her dad. Seeing me, she didn't cry. Her little short legs trotted over to Robert, reaching out both arms for a hug, murmuring, "See Papa, see Papa." Robert bent down, picked Bubble up, and walked over to my bed. Bubble stretched her little face out to press against mine, rubbing it slowly, and squinted her eyes in satisfaction. Bubble missed Papa so much. I was so moved that tears welled up in my eyes, and consequently, my attitude toward the main culprit standing next to me softened quite a bit. I reached out and hugged Bubble, letting her lean against me, absent-mindedly stroking her soft cheeks. Robert stood to the side, expressionless, looking like a bodyguard. Seeing his attitude toward Bubble, I figured he probably still didn't know she was his child. After all, I had always publicly claimed that Bubble was adopted, and back then, I had even forged a very convincing adoption certificate. Feeling relieved, I instructed him to take Bubble to kindergarten. Robert gave me a meaningful look but didn't say anything, carrying Bubble away. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. On the last day, an uninvited guest arrived. I was leaning against the headboard, staring blankly out the window, when a mocking voice came from the doorway. "Looking so pitiful, who are you putting on a show for?" I turned my head and saw William lazily leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, raising an eyebrow with a look of utter disdain. Seeing me look over, he seemed to get even more fired up. He strode in, not forgetting to shut the door behind him. He walked up to the bed, looked me up and down and curled his lips. "Looking this pathetic, Robert really isn't treating you well enough, huh? I silently rolled my eyes and turned my head away, out of sight, out of mind. Because I ignored him, William got even more excited. He plopped down on the edge of the bed and suddenly reached out, grabbing my chin to examine my face closely. I poked the inside of my cheek with my tongue, repeating a silent mantra in my head. This is Robert's white moonlight. This is Robert's untouchable first love. Touching him won't end well for anyone. Thinking this, I suppressed my anger, blinked, and expressionlessly let William manhandle my face. William clicked his tongue in amazement and suddenly spoke. I have to admit, you really do look quite a bit like me. Robert didn't lose out by using you as a substitute, huh? That sentence stepped right on my landmine. No one wants to be a substitute, and stating it so blatantly meant nothing but showing off. With a cold face, I slapped his hand away. Mr. William, stop joking around. I need to rest. Please get out. Having his pride wounded, William looked displeased. He stood up and looked down at me condescendingly. You're just an abandoned substitute. What are you so arrogant about? Believe it or not, I can have Robert send you right back abroad right now. I lowered my eyelashes and said flatly, suit yourself. You! William was furious, pointing his finger right at the tip of my nose, but the rest of his words were cut off. The ward door opened, and Robert's steady voice rang out, why are you here? Hearing this, William's face stiffened for a second before his expression softened. He turned around to look at Robert. Robert, you're here too. What a coincidence. Robert raised an eyebrow, gave him a weird look, and walked straight over. Only then did I notice he was carrying a lunchbox. He opened the lunchbox in front of me, helped me sit up, and skillfully tucked a pillow behind my back, saying in a low voice, eat first. After saying that, he looked up, meeting William's astonished gaze, and frowned again. I'm asking you, why are you here? Do you two know each other? I was a bit dumbfounded. Robert's attitude didn't seem like how one treats their white moonlight at all. It was more like how you treat an acquaintance you aren't very familiar with. William glared at me, as if unwilling to concede. Gritting his teeth, he put on a gentle smile, walked up, and hugged Robert's arm. Robert, my attitude was wrong before. I actually like you quite a bit. Those words made Robert's frown deepen. He pulled his arm back. What are you talking about? The scene was truly comical. Feeling a wave of vindication, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Seeing the piercing smile on my face, William's complexion turned from pale to green. Finally, he stomped his foot, glared fiercely at me, turned around, threw the door open, and ran out. Even through the walls, I could hear his heavy, clomping footsteps, as if he was expecting someone to chase after him. I looked at the expressionless Robert and couldn't resist a snarky comment. Not going to chase him? Robert sat down by the bed and was about to take out his laptop. Hearing my words, he paused. He lifted his eyelids to look at me, didn't answer my question, but instead asked, when did you two meet? I immediately shut my mouth, lowered my head to shovel food into my mouth, and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. My days abroad had been very difficult. Bubble was born with a genetic disease. Even without treatment, her monthly nutritional expenses were terrifyingly high. I went to work at a nearby bar. That was where I ran into William. The first time I saw him was back in the country, watching from afar as he and Robert acted intimately. Back then, he was wearing a white shirt and black pants, his layered hair falling across his forehead. Paired with those watery eyes, he looked pure and quiet. So, when I saw him in a private room at the bar, wearing a fiery crop top and shorts cut up to the root of his thighs, navigating effortlessly among a group of tall Western men, I was shocked for a moment. Then, I immediately lowered my head. Hadn't he returned to the country? William seemed to recognize me. He raised an eyebrow, the glitter on his eyelids sparkling. That waiter, yes, you. Come here. His eyes were full of amusement. He pointed at the bottles of alcohol on the table and waved his hand. Drink one bottle, $10,000. The people around him jeered in a language I didn't understand. Thinking of Bubble's tender little hands, I gritted my teeth and agreed. I didn't have a high tolerance for alcohol. The hard liquor burned down my throat, hurting like slicing knives. The alcohol quickly rushed to my brain. My last memory was of William's somewhat panicked voice. Why are you here? I shook my head, tossing away those memories of the past. Looking at Robert, who was entirely focused on his work in front of me, I suddenly thought of Bubble. Where's Bubble? Robert took off his earphones and looked at me. Bubble is at kindergarten. Oh, I pushed the bowl away and leaned back to lie down. Actually, I could have been discharged on the first day, but I don't know what got into Robert's head. He insisted I stay the full 3 days. There were still 24 hours until my discharge. On the day of my discharge, I said I wanted to take Bubble home. Robert didn't object. He was busy on a phone call, gave a rushed nod, and left. Watching his retreating back, I felt a bit emotional. When Robert was good to someone, he could hold them in the palm of his hand. Conversely, he could just as easily cast them into hell. The moment I got home, Bubble's soft embrace immediately threw itself at me. I crouched down to hug her, looking straight into her eyes. Bubble, let's go visit Grandma. Okay? Bubble nodded, slightly confused. This was my first time visiting my mom since returning to the country. My mom's grave was set up next to the small house where I grew up. When I carried Bubble over, I found the grave very clean. There wasn't even a single weed. A rotting wooden board was stuck into the ground, and in front of it lay 2 bouquets of already dried out flowers. When the wind blew, the withered petals rustled down onto the muddy ground. I set Bubble down, took a flower from my coat, and placed it on the ground, saying softly, "Mom, I brought Bubble to see you. Bubble is your granddaughter. She's very cute, right? She looks quite a bit like me when I was little." Bubble looked up at me, then looked at the wooden board in front of her. She suddenly hugged my leg, tapped her little chin, and nodded. My nose suddenly felt a bit sour. "Mom, I told you I wasn't a bad person. Look how cute Bubble is. Mom, for the sake of how well I treated you in the past, please look out for Bubble from up there. Protect her and keep her safe and healthy." In my memory, my mom seemed to have never smiled at me. The heavy burden of life had crushed her. Smiles vanished from the face of this beautiful woman living in hardship, replaced by endless anger. My mom was always swearing and cursing at me for making noise when she was working, cursing at my overly cautious manner when eating. Smoke would drift from her bright red lips, blurring her exhausted face. Her bony fingers would dig into my shoulders, her nails sinking into my flesh. My mom's face would become extremely agitated, even a little twisted, pointing at the neat lines of text in my textbooks. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes would snare me like a spiderweb. "You little brat, your grades are all right. You better study hard, get into a good university in the future, and buy me a big house." Chapter 4. I had a few peaceful days. Robert was busy with work and didn't come looking for me. I only saw news about him through the financial papers and broadcasts. In my free time, I took Bubble to see the doctor. Bubble was born with a genetic disease, and curing it completely required a massive amount of money. Relying on conservative treatment over the past few years, Bubble hadn't had a relapse. But this time, I was very nervous. After examining Bubble, the doctor frowned and called me into the inner room. "The child's condition is relatively stable for now, but as parents, you need to think about her future. If you have the means, she should get the surgery as soon as possible." Frowning, I lowered my head and quickly nodded. Walking out and seeing Bubble waiting obediently for me on the chair, my heart ached. Stroking Bubble's soft hair, I said softly, "It's all Papa's fault for not giving you a healthy body." Bubble couldn't understand my words. She looked at me with clear eyes, reached out to hug my leg, and said softly, "It's okay, Papa." Bubble's illness was simply a bottomless pit. The money I earned working abroad wasn't nearly enough. This was also the real reason I returned to the country. Robert is Bubble's father, and as the only heir to the Davis family, he is incredibly wealthy. If he was willing to acknowledge Bubble, her illness could receive the best possible treatment. But when I actually saw Robert again, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if, upon learning Bubble was his child, he would snatch her away and make sure I never saw her again. In his eyes, I might just be a worthless lover. Bubble is my life. I cannot live without her. When we got home, there was a person standing at the door. My heart tightened, and I stopped walking. "It's me." The person spoke and took 2 steps forward, revealing Robert's sharp, defined face. His eyes were lowered, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked completely exhausted. Just as I was about to speak, Robert spoke first. "Open the door. I'm not going to do anything." Bubble poked her head out from my arms. Seeing Robert, she was overjoyed. Her little body twisted, sliding down from my embrace, and she ran toward him with outstretched hands. I nervously licked my lips. I saw Robert glance at me before bending down to pick Bubble up. I had nothing to say. I pulled out my keys and unlocked the door to the rental apartment. We hadn't been back for long, and the place wasn't fully unpacked yet. The living room was cluttered with Bubble's toys and formula. Robert, holding Bubble while wearing a black suit that looked incredibly expensive, stood amidst the pile of little toys, looking entirely out of place. Thinking back to when I was his lover, I used to pretend to be an absolute neat freak just to please him. I smiled awkwardly. It's a bit messy. Robert didn't speak. He sat down on the sofa, his long legs having nowhere to comfortably rest. Bubble was pulling at his face and hair, murmuring something vaguely. I was too busy picking up toys from the floor to hear clearly. That night, after finally coaxing Bubble to sleep, I nervously walked into the bedroom. Robert, nearly 1.9 meters tall, was curled up on my single bed, looking incredibly cramped. He had fallen asleep. His eyelashes cast a shadow over his skin, and his damp, undried hair rested across his forehead. Stripped of his usual hostility, he looked much more docile. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at his sleeping face with complex emotions. Two thoughts were warring in my mind. The Davis family only had Robert as a legitimate son, but his father, David, had many illegitimate children. Back in the day, Robert's parents had been the model couple of high society, but David shattered all of that. David cheated while Emma was pregnant, and things spiraled completely out of control. Emma was a person who cared deeply about saving face. She refused to get a divorce. Instead, she blamed everything on her inability to please her husband after getting pregnant. Consequently, Robert became an unwanted child. Robert's childhood was miserable. Emma used harsh, strict methods to demand he study hard and excel, desperately hoping to make her absent husband notice their family again. Little Robert became the outlet for all her venting. Childhood shadows follow you for a lifetime. Even after Emma passed away and Robert finally gained his freedom, he indulged himself even more intensely, to a point that bordered on pathological. I used to wake up in the middle of the night to see the tall, imposing Robert curled up into a tight ball, tears at the corners of his eyes, trembling all over. In a sense, we are actually exactly the same kind of people. Chapter 5. Robert was busy taking over the family business. He hadn't shown his face for days. The accident happened very suddenly. Bubble took a fall at kindergarten and was rushed to the hospital. By the time I rushed to the hospital, the doctor shook his head and said, "We need to schedule the surgery as soon as possible. We can't delay this any longer. You need to figure something out." In that moment, my legs suddenly lost all their strength. I slumped to the floor. Even the lights above me blurred into a haze. Bubble's surgery couldn't wait any longer. The doctor's words hung over my head like a guillotine, but the money in my bank account wasn't nearly enough. With trembling hands, I contacted everyone I could possibly borrow money from. In the end, I had no choice but to bite the bullet and go find Robert. Just as I arrived downstairs at his corporate group's building, I saw William walking out the main doors, flanked by a few bodyguards, wearing a smug smile on his face. I instinctively ducked behind the corner, my heart pounding. Why was William here? Had he and Robert met again? As I hesitated, my phone suddenly buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Want money to save your daughter? Meet me at the West Suburb Warehouse at 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone." I stared at the screen, my fingers turning ice cold. This was obviously a trap, but I had no choice. The West Suburb Warehouse was cold and damp. The iron doors were half open, and it was pitch black inside. The moment I walked in, a loud click echoed behind me. The doors were locked. "Long time no see, Oliver." William stepped out from the shadows, followed by several burly men holding steel pipes. He smiled maliciously, his eyes full of mockery. "For that child of yours, you really dared to come?" I tensed my nerves and asked coldly, "Where's the money?" "The money?" he sneered, pulling a check from his pocket and waving it in front of my eyes. "You want it? Get on your knees and beg me." I stared at him and didn't move. William narrowed his eyes, suddenly grabbing me by the collar. His voice was vicious. "Do you think Robert actually cares about you? He was just playing around. He doesn't even want to see your face right now, and you expect him to save your daughter." I clenched my fists, my nails biting deeply into my palms. The next second, he shoved me away violently and gave a look to the men behind him. "Beat him. Just leave him with a breath." The moment the steel pipes swung down, I instinctively shielded my head. A searing pain radiated from my back and spread throughout my entire body. I curled up on the ground, the metallic taste of blood welling up in my throat. William crouched down, using the tip of his leather shoe to lift my chin. He smiled cruelly. "Does it hurt? This is just the beginning." I coughed up a mouthful of blood, my voice hoarse. "What exactly are you trying to do?" "What am I trying to do?" he sneered. "Because of you, Robert cut off every single path I had. Tell me, how should I repay you for that?" He stood up, looking down at me condescendingly. "Don't worry. I won't kill you. I'll make you watch helplessly as that child of yours. Crash. The warehouse doors were suddenly kicked open, letting blinding light spill in. A tall, slender figure stood in the light, wearing a suit, radiating sheer fury from head to toe. It was Robert. William's expression instantly froze. Robert strode over, kicking away the man holding me down. With one hand, he clamped around William's neck and slammed him directly against the wall. Who told you you could touch him? His voice was as cold as ice. His eyes filled with a ferocious, murderous intent. William's face turned flushed as he struggled to squeeze out a few words. Mr. Robert, I was just what? Robert sneered, his fingers tightening their grip. I told you, putting on an act is just putting on an act. Why did you have to push your luck? William couldn't speak. His eyes rolled back, looking like he was about to pass out. Robert tossed him aside, turned around, and scooped me up in his arms. His palms supported the back of my neck, his voice deep and hoarse. Does it hurt? I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, I heard William shouting from behind us. Robert, are you really going to fall out with me over a substitute? Robert slightly lifted his gaze. I told you not to think too highly of yourself. With that, he carried me horizontally in his arms and strode out. In the car, my whole body was trembling, covered in a mix of blood and cold sweat. I was an absolute mess. Robert used a wet wipe to clean the blood off my face bit by bit. His movement so gentle it didn't seem like him at all. Bubble is in the hospital, I said hoarsely. His fingertips paused. He looked up at me. Bubble is safe. I've already scheduled the surgery. I lowered my eyes as a sudden wave of exhaustion washed over me. The next second, Robert suddenly reached out to cup my chin, forcing my head up. Don't go to sleep. I opened my eyes, looked into his anxious gaze, and suddenly pulled at the corners of my mouth to smile. I whispered, Bubble is your child. You wouldn't have thought it, would you? That this defective organ could actually nurture such a cute baby. I couldn't say the rest of the words. Before my consciousness plunged into darkness, I heard Robert's trembling voice. I know. I've always known. When I woke up again, the doctor told me the surgery was a success. My body still ached terribly. Bringing my 4-drip with me, I went to see Bubble in the ICU. So many tubes were hooked up to her tiny body. Watching her, my nose stung and my eyes grew wet, almost dropping tears. Touching the glass, I apologized softly. I'm sorry. Papa couldn't give you a healthy body. A hand reached over and steadied my 4-pole. I turned my head to look. It was Robert. He was wearing casual clothes, carrying a lunchbox in his hand. His breathing was a bit heavy, like he had run all the way here. He caught his breath and said, Didn't I tell you to get some rest? Bubble's condition is very good right now, and she'll be transferred to a regular ward soon. You're still injured. Hurry back and lie down. Chapter 6. After returning to the private ward, I lay on the hospital bed, watching Robert busy himself around the room. A strange feeling suddenly welled up in my heart. You knew all along that Bubble was your biological daughter? I suddenly asked. Robert's movements paused. He turned to look at me, lowered his head, and gave a slight nod. Seeing him admit it, I took a deep breath. Since when did you know? Standing by the bed like a child who had done something wrong, Robert completely lacked the arrogance he had a few weeks ago. Since she was conceived. My eyes widened, and I almost choked on my own breath. When my injuries healed and it was time to be discharged, Robert seemed a bit reluctant to let me go. I kept a cold face, not wanting to talk to him. My feelings were incredibly conflicted right now. From what Robert told me, he knew my life abroad like the back of his hand, down to exactly what time I went to sleep and woke up. The medical expenses and procedures for Bubble's illness. He had secretly handled them all. Even that time William made things difficult for me at the bar. He was the one who rescued me, only to vanish without a trace afterward. Everything was completely beyond my expectations. A long-absent headache flared up again. What upset me was that he wasn't surprised by Bubble's existence at all. No wonder he was never curious about her background and didn't reject her closeness in the slightest. It had been so long I almost forgot. Robert used to be an incredibly self-centered person, let alone taking care of children. Just hearing a kid cry twice would send him running into my arms, complaining that the crying was too noisy. When Bubble was discharged, Robert came along to pick her up. Bubble still threw herself excitedly into his arms, her little mouth chattering non-stop. Being closer this time, I finally heard it clearly. Bubble was affectionately calling him Papa. Robert shot me a smug look. Bubble is calling me Papa. I didn't say a word, just picked up Bubble's luggage and walked out of the hospital. Robert dropped his stoic facade, smiling warmly as he held Bubble. It made Bubble so curious she reached out to pull at his face. Robert's family dynamics were incredibly complex. When his mother passed away, Robert was 17. Right after his college entrance exams, his father rushed to marry a young, beautiful woman, making her his stepmother. This woman was exceptionally capable. She even managed to tame his usually wayward father. The story devolved into a cliché wealthy family drama. The stepmother was full of hostility toward Robert, dead set on kicking him out of the house. In just 2 or 3 short years, she turned his father into a figurehead and seized control of the company. At 19, driven into a corner by his stepmother, Robert chose a different way to survive, shifting from one desperate situation into another disguised one. He began to act depraved, clubbing, getting into fights. Whatever his stepmother wanted to see him become, he played the part perfectly. With his good family background and looks, many people took the initiative to approach him. It was also during that time that someone fabricated a ridiculous rumor that Robert had a white moonlight named William hidden in his heart, and he remained single entirely for this person. Robert couldn't be bothered to clarify, causing the rumor to spread like wildfire. Surprisingly, even William, the other main character of the rumor, actually believed it to be true. That time he went to the airport, it wasn't to pick up William at all. It was to meet a key client who could help him take down his stepmother. Even my leaving the country was a part of his plan. When I was back in that familiar villa and saw an entire wall covered in photos, I stood completely frozen. One after another, they recorded every single moment of my life abroad. I reached out to touch those photos, turning in shock to ask Robert beside me, "You were monitoring me this whole time?" Robert leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his gaze deep. "While I was fighting my battles here, these photos were the only way I could see you." I whipped around. During all those days I struggled so bitterly abroad. Someone had actually been watching from afar the entire time. "Why didn't you come find me? Why didn't you explain everything clearly?" My voice unconsciously rose, trembling. Robert dropped his smile and gently stroked my hair. "Linda is a lunatic. I almost died at her hands. I couldn't let you fall into danger too. I love you, so I had to ensure you were absolutely safe." I bit my lip tightly, but the tears still fell uncontrollably. "So all my despair and heartbreak during that time didn't matter to you at all? You could have just told me the truth. I would have listened." Robert remained silent, blinking. "I'm sorry." I tilted my head back, trying hard to stop the tears from falling. "Robert, I won't forgive you." "Okay." Beneath the old wardrobe in the old house, I found stacks of small change my mother had hidden away. On the piece of paper right on top, written in her crooked handwriting, it said, "Money for Oliver's schooling." If you enjoyed this story, remember to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.